Welcome to Girl Fight Talk. I'm your host, as always, Kalah Haley, and happy Halloween. It is October 31st on a Monday, and it's probably one of the warmest Halloweens we've ever had in Colorado. Hashtag climate change. And I'm also going to push, what's his name? Leonardo DiCaprio. Did you see his documentary he put out last night from the National Geographic channel?
I haven't seen it. No, what is that?
Oh, it's real good. It's talking about climate change and putting a bunch of scientists on there to talk about what's going on around the world, all the coral reefs that are dying, whether or not we are at the point of no return, hashtag the tipping point, before the damage that we've done to the earth is that we can't fix it. So we'll talk about that more later. But right now, we've got an amazing guest today, guys. Ladies, I should say. Lucas Middlebrook from the Professional Fighters Association is going to be joining us today. He is a labor attorney, and he's representing the legal aspect of this union that's trying to become a union for the UFC fighters. And so we're going to go ahead and give him a call. Hey, Lucas, are you there?
I am, yes.
Hey, Lucas. Thanks so much for joining our show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I've been like plotting and scheming all my questions for you. But
wonderful.
So this is Girl Fight Talk. It's a podcast that's for women, by a woman, which is pretty rare in the MMA community. But I am excited to talk about stuff that obviously has to do with all the fighters, but I think that in a lot of ways these are very special, unique topics for women as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, give us a little bit. We already did your introduction. We gave you a shout out on Twitter to follow you at LKMiddleB on Twitter, and then the Professional Fighters Association website as well. So you give us a little bit of your background. You're a labor attorney, is that correct?
That is correct. I would say probably 90% of my law practice is labor-oriented. In the sports world, I represent the NBA Referees Union, the Major League Soccer Officials Union, and then outside of the sports world, I represent a number of unions in the airline industry, the Southwest Airlines mechanics, the Southwest Airlines flight attendants, and then some pilots unions at other carriers, and also some educators unions in the New York area as well. So that's primarily what my focus is on my practice. And then, of course, I represented Nick Diaz in front of the Nevada Athletic Commission, and that was I had history with drug and alcohol testing litigation, and I knew Nick's agent Lloyd Pearson through our joint work with the NBA Referees Union, and that's how that came to be.
Okay. So basically, for all of our audience listening and watching, you basically know your stuff. Basically, that's
I mean, I've been practicing labor law for about 11 years now, so it's been my focus in my career for the past 11 years.
Okay, and that's exciting because recently I think it was your tweet. You're very active on Twitter, which I love. But I think you tweeted out saying that Uber drivers, the classification changed for them rather than being independent contractors, they were classified as employees. Is that right?
Yeah, that was interesting. That was a finding by the New York State Department of Labor.
Okay.
So while that wasn't a finding by the National Labor Relations Board, it was a finding by the Department of Labor that Uber had misclassified the drivers as independent contractors. And I found that finding interesting because certainly the UFC has much more control over its fighters than Uber does over its drivers.
Right.
And so for the Department of Labor in New York to rule that the Uber drivers were actually employees, just shows that trend pushing towards employee status.
Yep.
We're seeing that a lot both in state departments of labor and IRS determinations, as well as the National Labor Relations Board, which actually in August of this year, General Counsel from the NLRB released a memo saying that it actually can be a violation of the Act simply by misclassifying your employees as independent contractors. That was very interesting that they came out with that advice memorandum.
That's really impressive. And so what does that do? Like, just within the context of Uber, what does that do for the Uber drivers? Because it's not like Uber corporate was saying, you guys have to drive these cars. You know, these are the only brand of cars that you can drive. You know, you can only drive at these hours, right? They don't even have those type of stipulations. And yet these guys are being classified as employees. What was the thing that, what was the thing that actually made them being classified as employees versus independent contractors?
It was just that they had a significant enough of control over their terms and conditions of employment, and like you said, they kind of can choose when they drive, but they still have to follow Uber's rules and regulations. They're still obviously taking a percentage of their salary is going to Uber, and so it boiled down to how much control over certain of their working conditions that they had, and that's what the National Labor Relations Board will look at as well. The NLRB always used to look at a 10-factor test, and then I believe it was in 2014 there was a very big Federal Express decision which added an 11th factor, which actually made it easier to reach a finding of employee status under the Act. And what's interesting is just, I think, a month ago, the NLRB in the Chicago region actually filed a complaint against a company called Postmates, which was a courier company who had independent contractors as drivers, and the NLRB filed a complaint because they felt that they were misclassifying them as independent contractors as opposed to employees. So the NLRB has been very active in its recent tenure. Now, it's helped that we've had 8 years of a Democrat administration in the White House.
Gotcha.
That because they appoint members of the National Labor Relations Board. So depending on which way this election turns out next week, those decisions could change depending on who gets in the White House. And so, but we've had a very union-friendly NLRB for the past 8 years. That's for sure.
Sure. Do you imagine that the UFC might be putting some money into making sure that the next chair or committee for the NLRB is more corporate friendly rather than union friendly?
I don't know. I know that Dana White spoke at the Republican National Convention, so I would think that we know which way he leans.
Sure. Yeah, loyalty is important for Dana, I guess.
Apparently.
Yeah, very sure. And so, okay, so give us a little bit of a context. So, I've been wondering, for a while. I know you guys started. What date did you start soliciting fighters for those solicitation cards?
It was shortly after the press conference that we had right before UFC 202.
Okay. And so are you at liberty to say, hey, this is what percentage of the UFC? Because I think there are around how many, like 500 to 600 fighters on in contract with UFC?
It varies when they release and they sign, but it hovers between 550 and 600.
Okay. And so about how many, not any names, right, but how many fighters or what percentage could you say have signed your guys' solicitation cards?
Yeah, I'm not really at liberty to give a percentage at this point.
Okay.
But what I will tell you, though, is it has not been a lightning fast process to get the cards signed. We've made progress, and it's been steady progress, but it hasn't happened overnight. And one of the main reasons for that is the geographical layout of the fighters. So it's not your typical organizing drive where you can go to the floor of the workplace and collect authorization cards, or even like with some of the professional referee groups that we've organized, they'll have a training camp and everyone will be there. And it's not the same that we're dealing with here. And also there's been a lot of fighters who are in fear of recrimination. So a lot of it is, first, it's education about the fact that that's illegal under the National Labor Relations Act. But even apart from that, the authorization cards are strictly confidential. So the employer never knows who signed cards and who didn't. So without giving a number, I'll say that it's been steady progress, but it hasn't been lightning fast up to this point.
Okay, and so can you say within the year, because you have like 1 year, you have a timeline of 1 year, correct, to have, 51% of fighters sign these cards?
Well, actually, you only need 30% in order to trigger an election with the National Labor Relations Board. So you have to get 30% of the group to sign cards, and then when you file those cards with the NLRB, they will verify their authenticity, and if they verify a showing of 30% or higher, then the NLRB will push towards an election, and it's during the election that you need 50% plus one of the group to vote yes for unionization.
Gotcha. And so, are you guys on track? Are you on track within your 1 year timeline to reach that goal? Do you feel confident? In other words, are you confident that you guys will have an election next year in 2017?
I am confident that we'll either have an election, or certainly if we get a significant number of cards, we will ask the UFC to voluntarily recognize the union. I don't believe that'll happen, but that's always something that you try first before filing with the NLRB.
Okay.
I've had it happen I've actually done that with some major sports leagues who have agreed to voluntarily recognize official unions instead of going through the NLRB process. But for instance, when the Major League Soccer officials organized, that was actually a pretty hard-fought process where we had litigation in front of the National Labor Relations Board in order to get to the election. But no, I do think we will. If the participation has been picking up as of late. We are actually in the process of trying to establish an interim executive board, which would consist of 9 fighters within the UFC, and that's important when you have unions that are starting from the ground up, because ultimately it's the fighters who are going to control this union. So in order to get an executive board in place, you have fighters making decisions that could shape the union and how it is administered from the beginning, so that it's not just Lucas Middlebrook and Jeff Forrest running the PFA. It's fighters making the decision, and I'm just there to answer questions and counsel them on the National Labor Relations Act and whatever else they might need. So we hope to actually announce that executive board in the near future.
Okay. Well, don't hesitate to give me a call when you guys want to announce that. And so the fighters who would be on that, would they become public?
Yes. They would.
Okay, that's big, because so far you've only had about one fighter who's UFC current active fighter who's actually probably been the most vocal.
And that's been Leslie.
Right.
She's been extremely vocal, and she's been extremely active, and I really can't applaud Leslie enough for the tireless effort she's put into this. Really starting right after the press conference, up until yesterday, I was in contact with her. So she's been really spectacular, reaching out to other fighters, willingness to serve on the executive board, and whatever she has to do. So she's been great. But no, our plan would be to have a 9-member board, and our plan would be to have multiple female fighters on the board as well.
That's great. That's what I want to hear, because I mean, especially, and I think it's been amazing because over the past I don't even know, a couple of months since the UFC has been sold, there have been current active roster fighters, such as Fabricio Verdum, right, who just had his Reebok protest and put a Nike, logo on his Reebok fighter kit. And it wasn't like a small little, how they have like the small little checks. It was like the big one. It was like the extra large one. And I'm like, okay, dude, you're like obviously trying to make a point here. And I think what fighters probably are afraid of is what Fabricio just experienced with. He just got basically fired from his TV broadcasting opportunities with the UFC because of his protest. And I mean, what do you have to say to fighters who do you think that it's worth for fighters to come out and say, hey, I don't like this, or I'm going to protest Reebok?
So I guess there's twofold answer to that question, and one is that if they had a collective bargaining agreement in place, and let's say just for the moment we'll say that the TV side of what he was doing was included within his duties as a UFC employee, then he would have a grievance process with which to address what the discipline that they took against him. And ultimately, if the parties couldn't agree to resolve that, they could take it in front of an independent arbitrator, and the parties would each present their cases as to whether they had just cause to discipline him in the manner that they did. So that process would be available to them under the collective bargaining agreement. The second piece is, in terms of the protest, what I would counsel fighters to do would be to speak of the terms and conditions of the employment that you're unhappy with, but speak about them in the context of supporting the union. Because if then the UFC takes retaliatory action against them, they can file what's called an 8A1 charge or an 8A3 charge with the National Labor Relations Board because it is illegal to retaliate against individuals for exercising their statutory right to collectively bargain, and that includes organizing a union as well.
Okay. So there you go, fighters. If you have a complaint or if you want to protest it, do it in a strategic way that actually brings about the change that you want to see, not just the flippant, getting upset and doing something. Because, I think all fighters could understand where Fabricio's coming from, right? And it's the same issue that George has and why he's not fighting at UFC 206 in Toronto. It's basically the simple fact that the UFC fighters were not a part of the negotiations with Reebok. And the UFC made them sign that, an addendum to their contracts?
Right, to the promotional, the ancillary rights agreement, correct. And that's a big sticking point because if you look at the numbers for each of these fight events, the Reebok money that gets billed out to the fighters is so egregiously low.
It's so low.
And in terms of if we were able to get the UFC to open the books, it would be of great interest to me to see the total value of the Reebok deal versus what the fighters are actually receiving from it. So in most other professional sports, you see about a 50-50 revenue split between the leagues and the players' unions. And what I'm reading on the NBA NBPA agreement that's going to most likely be finalized here shortly is that the players looks like they've been able to negotiate a 51-49 split this time around. So that's pretty amazing when you look at what the numbers show us is the UFC fighters are anywhere between a 10 to 15% revenue share, which is extremely low in the professional sports industry, especially for an entity that just sold for billions of dollars.
Right, exactly. And that's where that's where you have I never understood or liked when I've heard Dana say, we don't like to tell the fighters pay because then you're going to have all their family members and, Cousin Ray Ray coming out the woodwork to ask for money. Trust me, Cousin Ray Ray's out the woodwork asking for money regardless of knowing that fighters pay. And the other thing is it's like, no, when you don't put out people's pay or you don't let us know what's going on, there's no sense of accountability, right? No one can say, hey, you guys are not paying them enough, or the only ones who know what's going on are the fighters and the managers. And I don't know, is there fighters can actually say what they get paid, right? Like if they wanted to?
They could if they wanted to. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge within the industry that fighters in their first fights, coming into the UFC, you're making either 10-10 or 12-12.
Right.
12-12 may be the new standard. So it's $12,000 to show up and an additional 12 if you win. And that's before any taxes are taken out. They 1099 the individual. So you think about that in terms of training camps and coaches and preparation. These 12-12 fighters, in most instances, are actually losing money or paying to fight in the UFC, which is just ridiculous to me. There should be. I'm not saying everyone should make Conor McGregor money because just like everyone doesn't make LeBron James money or Kobe Bryant money or Alex Rodriguez money, but there's league minimums.
Right.
So in baseball, if you come up to the minor leagues, even if it's for a cup of coffee, you're entitled to the league minimum of $500,000.
Right.
And yes, the higher performers can negotiate upwards, but there should be a league minimum and a minimum fight purse because these fighters certainly shouldn't be losing money to fight in the UFC.
Exactly.
And if they're expected to fight multiple fights throughout the year, then this should be their career, and there should be some financial stability so that they don't feel the necessity to go out and own a gym or run a gym or have different occupations. If they're expected to fight multiple times, then they should feel financially stable enough to devote the entire year to training and staying healthy to participate in those fights. And that brings me to the fact that they don't get comprehensive health care either.
Right.
They're covered for training or when they're in the octagon, but if they have a sinus infection or God forbid a debilitating disease, they don't have comprehensive health care. So that's another cost that if they want that, they're going to have to go out and purchase that on the open marketplace.
Yep. And that's the other thing I was going to say about women is women have a whole another level of health related, expenses than men do, when it comes to getting your regular checkups, going to see your gynecologist, all of these different things. I mean, even if women decide to take, a sabbatical to have a child in between their UFC career, who's going to help to make sure that they can have the medical expenses, that any other woman in any other career could have. But as it stands right now at the UFC, that would not be covered.
Right, absolutely. That's a great point, and it actually reminds me of the first collective bargaining agreement that we secured for the Major League Soccer officials. One of the provisions in that, because they do have a number of female officials in their ranks, was a maternity leave provision in the CBA, and they get up to 6 months for maternity leave, 3 of which is paid at full salary levels. So, that was one piece that was important to the group to secure for their female members.
Yep. And so I just want to ask quickly, with George St. Pierre's situation, right? They've kind of hit a stone wall, especially as the new UFC brass has come into play. WME has come in, and they're now the new owners of the UFC. So negotiations had been going well, as reports say, up until the new ownership. And then basically once they came into the picture, negotiations stopped, and George is no longer fighting at UFC 206 in Toronto. What do you think? Because legally, right, with a contract, George, he basically signed his contract under the conditions that all of those other factors would be consistent, meaning he'd still have his sponsors, he'd still be able to make money inside the octagon, independent of the UFC. What would happen? What needs to happen in order for George's contract? Basically, let me ask this: is he a free agent? Because I think that's like the big question: is he actually a free agent?
Yeah, they're gonna. I would think that if he continues to pursue it legally with some sort of state or federal court lawsuit, that the two sides are going to fight over that for quite some time, and it's going to cost George a lot of money to litigate against that entity. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess the one interesting piece of that is, obviously, George would be suing for some sort of breach of contract action, and unless the court sealed those records, his contract would then be amended it would be appended to the complaint, which would make the contract then a public record. And what's interesting to me is, does the UFC want that to happen? Do they want these contracts actually out in the public, in the open, so that everyone can finally see what they look like? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have seen them already, but that would be on a much larger scale. That it would be out there. Now, from what I've read, George's attorney is arguing that under the contract, the UFC has the obligation to make fights available to the fighter, and I believe the argument is that they didn't uphold their end of the bargain, of the quid pro quo, so to speak, and therefore the contract should be invalidated. I think I've read that's part of their argument. Mm-hmm. You never know what a court of law is going to do, but breach of contract actions are tough, because if the court determines that the language on the document is clear and unambiguous, then the language itself controls, which means you can't then go look at what they call parole evidence, which is evidence that led to the contract being written the way it is, negotiating history or what the parties intended. You only go to that evidence if the language is ambiguous and it's unclear. And so that's the first hurdle: is it clear and unambiguous? Was he represented when he signed it? And if so, a lot of times you're stuck with the deal. So I'm not saying that that's going to be the case, but they're not slam dunks. And
Sure.
they're maybe not even 10-foot jumpers. It might be a 3-point shot. Not Steph Curry taking the shot in those types of litigation matters.
But isn't it? I mean, like the simple fact that he signed a contract under certain conditions, right? Like there was a certain climate of the UFC. The UFC changed the climate, and when he came back, his contract it doesn't really apply anymore, right? Because
that's interesting. I mean, I guess, are you referring to if he signed his contract prior to the Reebok addendum being added?
Exactly.
Then is it applicable? That's a great question, and I don't know if. I guess what we don't know, and maybe it's been out there and I haven't read it, is whether or not once that was added to the contract, if George was made aware and some sort of consent, in some sort of valid consent, accepted that. And maybe that's the question that we don't know the answer to.
Okay. Good to know. Hey, well, Lucas, I know we, I could talk to you more and more. I feel like I have so many questions, but I want to respect your other appointments today. Thank you so much for coming on and just being another voice for us to talk about what's going on in the sport of MMA. You have any thing you want to push out on the show?
No, just that keep. I would just tell fighters to stay engaged and ask questions and feel free to reach out. I know my information is on the PFA website, and so is Jeff Boris's, and I'm always happy to talk with anybody if they have any questions. And we hope to, like I said, announce the interim executive board hopefully within the coming month.
Awesome. That sounds really exciting. Well, thanks again, Lucas. We'll have to have you on again, especially after this executive board's introduced, and maybe have another one of those board members on as well. So we're very excited.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Lucas.
Okay, thanks for having me.
All right. Bye. Wow. Very excited to have Lucas Middlebrook. He obviously knows his stuff. He's been in this industry for over a decade and is bringing his expertise into our sport, which honestly is an honor. It says a lot about where the sport where it was and where it's come to where we've attracted the attention of Jeff Boris, who was, the manager for Barry Bonds and a bunch of other like high profile baseball players. And now we've got Lucas Middlebrook, who is, a credentialed labor attorney. He shared so much with us between, Uber drivers. That I think that was probably one of the most exciting things I had heard, because when you have these big companies and they're relevant companies, they're not like, like your grandmother's company. They're like, actually like, oh no, like that's a 20-something-year-old's company. That's a young 30-year-old's company. And they got it wrong too. So if that's the case, then when we're definitely primed we're moving in the right direction and we have the right support systems to move in the right direction. One of the things I wanted to ask him was also, and I've heard different interviews talking about the differences between the PFA, the Professional Fighters Association, and the MMAFA, the MMA Fighting Association. And, there are a lot of fighters who I think might be even confused about, okay, well, what does each group offer? Why are there two groups? Can't those two groups just get along and be friends? This isn't about the organizations. This is about the fighters. And so I can understand that where the fighters could be coming from and, hey, why are these guys not getting along? But I do think that, if anything, I think the PFA personally has probably more clout. And within the last, not even an entire year, but within the last maybe 6 or so months, they've made some pretty big moves in the space of MMA. And then to also announce, he just made the announcement that they're going to be having a fighters executive board for the PFA. And I think that to have fighters like Leslie Smith and other fighters, obviously Matt Mitrione was at that press conference. He's no longer a UFC fighter, but to have fighters of that, who are outspoken, who are well-spoken, who are well-informed, and who are also passionate, to have them represent the fighters and to have them be able to advocate on behalf of the PFA and get more people to sign those cards. I think that's a really powerful tool and a really a good step in a good direction for the PFA. I think it's very clear, between George not being on UFC 206, Fabricio Verdum having his issues with the UFC and Reebok. These are issues that are only going to continue to increase. People are only going to become more and more vocal about their complaints and the issues that they have, as they should be. This is their livelihood, just as Lucas said. This isn't like a hobby. It's obviously not a hobby if the sport just got sold, or the organization just got sold for $4 billion, right? And you can't expect. Obviously, you have fighters who respect that, and they see that the UFC and Dana and the Fertittas put a lot of effort and money and invested their lives to this sport, and that does not go unnoticed, obviously. But when you realize you're a part of something that it's that big, and you're not feeling it, it kind of debunks the whole idea of the trickle down effect. It's like, no, there was no trickle down. It stopped at the top. So obviously you see more so of the quote trickle down effect with Conor when people see that, oh wow, he got a disclosed purse of $1 million. Oh wow, he got a disclosed purse of $3 million. So the reason why it's a trickle down effect is because information is made public. People are educated and aware. They are not misinformed. And so therefore, when they go into the negotiating room, when they go into the negotiating table and they meet Dana face to face, or their manager meets with Dana and the new guys, they say, you know what, this is what's happened. And we know that this is a possibility. And so we're going to demand more because we know that our value is that much. And that's exactly what should happen. That's what's supposed to happen in a capitalistic society, right? It's only when people hide information and they don't make information public or transparent that you aren't able to determine what your market value is. And the UFC likes it that way, honestly. Let's just keep it real. Like, if they're capitalists and they're trying to gain as much money as they can, what would you do? If you were in their position, what would you do in order to make sure that you bring home as much revenue at the end of the day? You don't let the fighters know what their value is. Conor demands his value. And his value is like, I mean, you look at his the Mac Life, he just started that back up again, and he's got like over 100,000 views on each, thing. But you know what though? When you prove your value, you don't wait for the UFC to show you what your value is or to guess. You know what Conor's doing? He's making his own ruler. He's making his own measuring stick. So he's able to determine and say, hey, these are my numbers by myself without anything that the UFC did to help me. This is my brand and this is what it's worth. And I think maybe the UFC fighters have to go out there and start showing themselves and showing the UFC what they are worth. But yeah, that's a lot. I hope you guys can, chew on that for a while and really think about it. And encourage your fighters. If you're a fan of a fighter on Twitter or wherever, encourage them to, even if it's not the PFA, just to be aware that they have so much more power and leverage together than they do independently. So, yeah, what do we have going on? We just went up to Olympic Training Center.
Yes,
a couple days ago.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Josh got to watch and film as as Trinity Griffin, my good friend, flipped me around. It was really, I don't know.
You looked like you were in pain.
I was a little bit in pain. I think I said something like, I need a helmet. Because I was like, dang. And she's smaller than me, too. She's like 5'4", 5'5", and I'm like 5'7", 5'8", and she's just like throwing me around like a sack of potatoes. I felt like a sack of potatoes. One day, I'm going to like have a rematch. I'm calling you out, Trinity. One day, we're going to have a rematch, and it's not going to be that easy for you to throw me around. I'm going to make it a little bit more difficult.
You could have like a weapon on you, because that's probably the only way you're going to be able to take her down.
We need to like put in like striking, and then we'll put that up for you guys. No, I don't know. She said she didn't want to break her nose again, which I was like, I can understand
That's
that.
her weak spot then. That's what you go for. Go for that.
I feel so bad though. I wouldn't want to do that to my friend.
In the ring, she's not your friend though.
Oh
In
my
the ring,
gosh.
she's your enemy.
Now I know how those UFC fighters are like, I don't want to break my friend's nose. You should if you're getting paid. That's the thing. I'm not getting paid.
I'd probably break anybody's nose if I was getting paid.
Yeah, right? No, I just feel so bad.
I'd probably break my own mother's nose.
Oh,
if somebody was like, here's $1,000.
Dang,
$1,000.
Josh. Just so you know, Josh can be bought. Josh can be bought.
It doesn't take much.
It doesn't take much. Josh, so basically you're saying you'd punch me in the nose.
I'd definitely punch you in the nose.
Oh my gosh.
And I'd get it on camera. That way all my followers and your followers would watch it.
And then you get sponsorship deals.
Exactly.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. I don't know. Trinity's awesome. We had a lot of fun. We have some other fun stuff coming up. I didn't tell you guys about this, but I got to cover Glory 34. That was here in Denver. It was like 2 weeks ago. It was my first time doing like live coverage. So basically tweeting the whole night, which I learned. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Because I didn't really know it. I'll be honest. I didn't really know what to do too much. But I like looked at everybody else and I'm like, they're just tweeting. okay, I can do that. And I was just like, all right. But yeah, I'm reading this article, guys. It's interesting because Nikki Holtzkin and Gronhart, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name. That fight was not, it was a unanimous, it was, what was it? It was Nikki won 3 rounds and Gronhart won 2. I didn't agree with that scoring. I think it was the 3rd round that I thought that Gronhart won. But I don't know. I just think the judging all around is just weird. And it was like one of the first, glory events it was the first glory event I'd ever been to. But I was just like, I feel like Nikki's just a pretty boy, which he is. He's a very good looking guy. But I was like, you guys just want to market this guy. So it makes me feel like they like let him win. But who knows? Accusations, speculation. That's what this show is all about. No, just kidding. But yeah, guys, we have some exciting stuff to come up. I'm not going to say it yet because it wouldn't be right for me to say it quite yet. But I have some exciting stuff coming up in about 2 weeks that I'll probably let you know about next week once I get some more stuff finalized. Have a happy Halloween. Please don't do anything stupid. Like for example, okay, I work with kids all day, right? I work with kids at my church, and it's so much fun, and they are rascals. But the thing is like, one of them was like, let's go clown hunting. And I'm like, okay.
Sounds terrible.
Okay, let's maybe like clown scouting. But here I am supposed to be like the voice of reason within these like 16 and 17-year-olds. And I'm letting them like manipulate me and like persuade me. And I just feel like, dang it, I'm supposed to be the adult here. And you guys are just so good at like
peer pressure.
Yeah, peer pressure. I feel like I'm back in high school with them.
Younger than you, so it's not peer pressure.
Well, and I want them to like
child pressure.
Child pressure. Yeah, their parents are probably like, Kalah, that's probably not a good idea. And then I blame one of the teens, and I'm like, it's his fault. He said to do it.
Take him out, drop him off somewhere, leave him there, and then they'll totally respect you.
What?
Or they'll either have,
or I'll get fired.
That, or they'll take an Uber. Either way, they'll know you're for real.
Oh no! But I think it would be kind of fun. I'm just being honest. I think it would be kind of fun if we went and like tried to find some clowns. I heard that they were in Boulder, so I may or may not go up to Boulder tonight. And
you know where all of them live, so you should just put a clown mask on and go scare them at night.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Well, no, then they'd be like, yeah, you're here to scare the little children with us. That'd be real awkward.
But if they didn't know about it, if it was a surprise.
I don't know. Clown the clowns?
Clown the clowns.
Clown the clowns.
Reverse it.
Hashtag clown the clowns. All right, guys, have a happy Halloween. We'll see you next week.